Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Today on the Newscast, the Abraham Accords have been signed. I just returned from Washington, D.C., where I attended the signing ceremony at the White House, and today I will bring you the inside story of what I saw and what comes next. Stick around. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. As I mentioned in the lead-in, I just returned from Washington, D.C. It's really been a whirlwind 48 hours, I guess you could say. On Tuesday, September 15th, I was on the south lawn of the White House in attendance for the historic signing of the Abraham Accords between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Folks, it is a day I will never forget. What a blessing and honor and a privilege to be in attendance as history was made, to really be an eyewitness to history. It's a day I will never forget. I want to break down for you today what I saw at the ceremony, what it all means, and what comes next in the Middle East and how it affects you. But before we get into it, I just want to encourage you to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube, and be sure to click that notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We're bringing you the kind of cutting edge, timely information, inside information you'll get today that you just won't hear anywhere else, certainly not in the mainstream media. As a matter of fact, it seems to me that the only people who are more upset about the signing of the Abraham Accords and Israel and its Sunni Arab neighbors coming closer together, the only people more upset about that, other than Iran's regime, Erdogan in Turkey, Hamas, Hezbollah, Mahmoud Abbas, is the mainstream media. Judging by their coverage, their not so flattering, very skeptical coverage of the Abraham Accords signing on Tuesday, and really the great work that the Trump administration has done to bring that all together. The mainstream media doesn't seem so happy. I'm sure former Obama administration officials don't seem so happy as well, because this has been decades, right? The same paradigm, the same two-state solution paradigm, and instead, the Trump administration went outside of the box and said, okay, Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian Authority, you don't want to make peace, clearly, but you know what? The Arab nations surrounding Israel do want to make peace. Imagine that. So it's happening now. It's all unfolding. According to President Trump at the ceremony the other day, there's at least 5 or 6, maybe as many as 9 other Sunni Muslim nations who are ready, who are lining up to make peace with Israel. So that's an exciting thing to see. And the main reason for it, obviously, economic. Israel's technological prowess comes into play. Its neighbors want some of that. They want to be blessed by Israel. Israel is a blessing to the world. But obviously, the other main reason is that looming Iran threat, which is looming over the region still, and the Iranian axis. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Before I get to it, hey, let's kind of set the scene and let me give you a lay of the land on what I saw at the White House. A beautiful ceremony, number one, folks. About 700 people reportedly in attendance. I saw a lot of familiar, friendly faces, including the one and only Pastor John Hagee, founder and national chairman of Christians United for Israel, where I hang my hat on a regular basis. Also, the great one from Fox News and talk radio fame, Mark Levin, was there. Many top officials, senators, members of Congress on the south lawn of the White House. Just a beautiful, moving ceremony. I have to say, when Prime Minister Netanyahu just talked from his heart, he spoke from his heart. You could see it. And he talked about the decades and decades that the Jewish people, that the people of Israel have longed for peace with their neighbors, longed to be accepted as, hey, we are here to stay, and we are not going anywhere. And finally, to begin to have that. You could see the emotion on the Prime Minister's face. He spoke movingly about his brother Yoni Netanyahu, who obviously died in 1976 during the Entebbe raid in Uganda, died a hero. So all of these lives that have been lost, Prime Minister Netanyahu talked about in pursuit of peace, and now we are seeing some major stirrings of it, and on a different track. That's the great thing about it, that the Trump administration and Prime Minister Netanyahu and Bahrain and UAE, these nations deserve a lot of credit for having the vision to think outside the box, to come forward, to come together, and to move forward. So a great ceremony. President Trump was very forthright when he spoke. He said, look, this is only the beginning. We are trying to change the game in the Middle East. And the foreign ministers of Bahrain and the UAE spoke as well and had some really positive words. What an encouraging day. It's a day I never thought I'd see, I'll be honest with you. But to be there and just be a few yards from the, I guess you would say, the table where the deals were signed, it was really an electrifying moment. I know there was a buzz in the air, and it reminded me a lot of May 2018, May 14th, 2018 to be precise. I also had the honor and the privilege to attend the opening ceremony for the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Folks, I'm a very fortunate guy. God has blessed me to be an eyewitness to history for both of these amazing events. And it was the same deal in Jerusalem in May 2018. Just a great feeling in the air. The Spirit of God in the air, the Holy Spirit in the air, because His hand was on that in May 2018 on the grand opening of the Jerusalem Embassy. It was prophetic, and I believe the events of Tuesday, September 15th, 2020, the signing of the Abraham Accords, was also prophetic. Now, after the ceremony, I was able to accompany my good friends, best-selling author Joel Rosenberg and David Brody of CBN News as we met with Vice President Mike Pence in the White House. I sat in as David interviewed the Vice President for CBN News, and folks, I was just so impressed by Vice President Pence, getting a chance to be around him for about 30 minutes, seeing how he carries himself, number one, just total class, and number two, hearing him speak with such conviction about the Trump administration's vision for the Middle East, new vision, a game-changing vision for the Middle East, and their genuine love and affection for Israel and the Jewish state and the Jewish people. How refreshing to hear after 8 years of the Obama administration, to say the least. So that was a great experience and an honor as well to meet the Vice President. So what a day, all in all. But you're probably wondering, okay, you were there at this great ceremony, you saw all the grandeur, you saw history made, but what does it all mean? What now? Here are my three big takeaways from the signing of the Abraham Accords and what it means going forward. Number one of the things that stood out to me, really just entering the White House, kind of going through security, there were many Arab officials there. I spoke to several officials from Arab nations, from Sunni Arab nations, and some of the nations did not yet have full diplomatic relations with Israel. That kind of keeps in line with what President Trump teased, I guess you could say, at the ceremony, that we have up to 9 Sunni Muslim nations that are also lined up and getting ready to make peace with Israel. So to me, it was very encouraging to see that, and there was a warmth. A lot of times people say, look, Israel's peace treaty with Egypt, which was signed in the late 70s. Its peace treaty with Jordan, which was signed in 1994, which was the last treaty that Israel signed with an Arab nation before the Abraham Accords. A lot of people have said, you know, they are cold peaces. There's no real warmth there between the nations. Yeah, it's a peace, but it's a cold peace. What I sensed on Tuesday was a genuine warmth, not only from the Arab officials in attendance, obviously the foreign ministers of the UAE and Bahrain, but remember, folks, also the treaties with Jordan and Egypt came after war between those nations and Israel. Israel has not been battling, obviously, Bahrain or the UAE, so they're really starting out here in a very good place. There's no history of casualties or warfare between the nations. That's number one. So I think that's a big indicator too, and a big reason for the warmth that we're seeing. And I believe these treaties with the UAE in particular could surpass the previous treaties with Egypt and Jordan in many ways, especially on the economic and technological scientific side. The UAE, hey folks, that's a global hub, economically, high-tech, everything else. Really the perfect peace partner for Israel. I'm excited to see what happens there. So first big takeaway, look for a warm, I guess you would call it, peace between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, and look for, again, more to come into the fold very soon. More on that in a second. Number two, the Trump administration fully understands the Iran threat. It was mentioned several times during the ceremony on Tuesday, both from the podium and also privately in conversations I had on the South Lawn of the White House. This is an administration, and I've known this from previous meetings with Trump administration officials and briefings I've sat in on the past 4 years or so. And I've heard them talk about the Iranian regime. Folks, they get it. And that's encouraging because here on the Newscast, of course, and on the Watchman TV show every week, we are sounding the alarm And we are literally stepping into that role as watchmen on the wall and trying to inform you about the looming Iranian threat, not only to Israel and the region, but to the world, that Iranian axis. With Hamas, Hezbollah, the Assad regime, and Turkey lurking, again, sometimes working with Iran, most of the time working independently, as Recep Erdogan, the budding caliph, in his view, of a new Ottoman Empire, is stirring up a lot of trouble. More on him coming in future newscasts, but that dynamic is lining up. Again, it's the wheat and the tares, right? We've talked about here on previous newscasts where we have Israel, the good, the wheat. That New Testament parallel I'm making, Jesus talks about a day coming where the wheat will be separated from the tares. Let's include among the wheat, I guess you would say, the Sunni Arab nations like Bahrain, UAE, Jordan, Egypt, and more to come, aligning with Israel and the West against the tares, the forces of evil. I do not use that word lightly. The Iranian regime, Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Assad regime in Syria, and yes, Erdogan's Turkey under Erdogan's radical leadership. You have to put Turkey in that tares camp right now. At the end of the day, the Trump administration understands what it's facing. As I come to you today, Thursday, September 17th, the Trump administration just sanctioned some Hezbollah-connected members overseas, so they continue to squeeze Iran and Hezbollah and their various proxies and Shia militias. So that's a good thing to have. Look, the leader of the free world, and under the Trump administration, America has stepped back into that role, thankfully, as the leader of the free world. It's refreshing and comforting to know that the leader of the free world gets it when it comes to the major threats that are facing the free world. And at the top of that list is the Iranian regime. So that's my second big takeaway. It can help you to rest easy, I guess, to know that, look, we're in good hands in the foreign policy realm. If you're an American, especially like me, but wherever you live, if you live in the free world, God willing, know that the leader of the free world right now gets it when it comes to these various threats. My third takeaway, obviously, and the big tease, I guess you would say, is who comes next? The name on everyone's lips is Saudi Arabia. Obviously, everyone wants to see just a groundbreaking Saudi-Israel peace deal. Folks, could you imagine? I mean, Saudi Arabia obviously is the birthplace of Islam, the site of Mecca and Medina, the holiest place in Islam. That would be literally earth-shattering to see the Saudis come to the table and make peace with Israel. In today's Middle East, expect the unexpected. I would not count it out, folks. It could very well happen. It could happen soon. I talked to a few people who I guess you could say are in the know, and I asked specifically about Saudi Arabia. Look, we've heard Oman, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, all very exciting, but obviously Saudi Arabia would be the big one. The birthplace of Islam, the site of Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in Islam. Literally, it would be earth-shattering in a good way to see the Saudis come to the peace table with Israel. One person who's in the know, who has traveled to Saudi Arabia, to other Gulf countries over the past few decades, and talked about peace with the officials in those countries, said, look, take it slowly. He believes, this person I spoke to, believes that Saudi Arabia will come into the fold, that it's going to happen. But let's take it step by step. We talked about here on the newscast last week that Saudi Arabia is now letting Israel fly over Saudi airspace, which, wow, might not seem like a lot to you folks, but that's a big deal to let Israel use Saudi airspace. Hey, that's one step. We'll see maybe normalization on other levels before the deal is actually signed. But certainly, my source on the South Lawn of the White House said certainly it is moving towards that, and that's a good thing. So Saudi Arabia will, it looks like, eventually come into the fold. A lot of people have been talking about Oman as the next nation, another Gulf nation, as the next nation to come to the peace table. If you remember 2018, Prime Minister Netanyahu made that dramatic trip to Oman and met with the king there. So Morocco also, remember, Israeli tourists are actually allowed to travel to Morocco. There's not official diplomatic relations there, but there is some back and forth there where Israelis actually go to Morocco. Morocco still has a small Jewish community, once had a very large Jewish community. That's another potential peace partner, obviously a beautiful country there. So who knows? We live in exciting times. We live in perilous times. But above all, we live in Bible times, prophetic times. Now be sure to leave your comments and let us know what you think. I don't get a chance to respond to every comment, but I assure you I do try to read all of them. Some commenters over the past few weeks have said, uh-oh, is this the big one? Is this the false peace, the 7-year peace deal that the Antichrist will broker between Israel and its enemies that will set off the 7-year tribulation period? Obviously, the book of Revelation talks about this. Obviously, the book of Daniel talks about this. Folks, this is not that. These deals that Israel is coming to with Sunni Arab nations are a good thing in my view. Again, the wheat is being separated from the tares. As we said earlier, these are nations that genuinely want peace. They're sick of hostility and war. They see no reason to have hostility towards Israel. They see Israel as a blessing to the region. They want to benefit from those blessings that Israel gives, whether it's economic, high-tech, technological, tourism, all the rest. That's number one. And number two, this is a coalition forming against the Iranian axis. That's a very important and very positive thing. Israel is not all alone in the region. We know America obviously has Israel's back, but Israel is not alone right now. It has this budding coalition above board with Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, and behind the scenes with others like the Saudis, and they are aligned firmly together, shoulder to shoulder, against the Iranian regime. To me, this is a good thing. Again, this is not that when it comes to that 7-year peace deal, which one day will come. The Word of God is very clear, but this is not that. Thank God, it's a good thing. Hey, again, I'm just kind of buzzing from being there on Tuesday. What an experience. And hey, I hope to attend many more as we're talking about. Can you imagine the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in D.C. at the White House signing with Prime Minister Netanyahu? What an image that would be. Folks, that is within our grasp right now. We could really see this happen. Again, Bible times. Amazing to see how God Almighty is moving the chess pieces on the board prophetically for such a time as this. So be sure to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube. Click the notification bell again so you continue to get alerts every time these updates we are posting go up right here on our YouTube channel. You do not want to miss it. We will continue to bring you the inside stories. So thanks for joining us today on the Newscast. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.